And hello. Welcome back to the Pitboss Review. This is Pat Pitboss, your friendly neighborhood upstart with your, apparently, like once every 6 month update on what's going on in the deterioration of Western decency. And I have been away for a while. There's been a lot of things going on in my life and businesses and, just evolution as a father, as a man, as a recovering addict and trying to become a real human. And I haven't had the time to sit down here with my very rudimentary equipment and rant for an hour or two. Some people have asked me, like, man, it's been like 6 months since you had something to do. But I have been very active on the Pitboss Review Instagram. You might notice that I post pretty regularly on there, and I tell people the things that I'm seeing going on. Not only in my culture, but global. And I think a lot of people are recognizing this. And we're having, what we're having is like a seriously existential crisis with a number of intersecting factors, right? We might be going to war, right? That's a pretty big thing. And there are wars happening all around the world, largely by people that have zero to do with me living in the middle of Canada. But we're sending boys off to die, and we're trying to convince us, well, not us, certain people in certain positions of power are trying to convince you that you need to spend your money and you need to send your children, and we need to support the war over there. We're having a hard time buying food for ourselves. We're having a hard time making rent or paying our mortgages. The homelessness is piling up. We have needles and crack pipes on the street. We've got, sexual assaults happening by these vagrants, grabbing young ladies, leaving parties and abusing them relentlessly for 45 minutes before they end up at St. Paul's Hospital. But we need to be spending more money on Israel. We need to be spending more money on the Ukraine, because it's for the global good. In the meantime, our businesses and our vehicles and our streets are deteriorating. Our businesses and vehicles are getting broken into. But we really, really need to care about Israel. We really need to care about Palestine. We need to send money to Israel, and we need to protect the people of Palestine. Conversely, we got to do both of these things at the same time. And we have to send our kids, why aren't you joining the army? To die for some corporate elite that want to make more money, where the conspiracy of profit, you don't have to pay taxes. You run away and you put all your money in offshore accounts. Zelensky has offshore accounts. They caught him laundering money, and he's got $1 million condos in London and things like this. These government, you can look that up, the $1 million condo and the offshore banking that Zelensky and his little acting troubadours, his acting troupe that are the puppet government in Ukraine, they all have offshore accounts. Huge swaths of money that we've been dumping into these overseas wars are going missing, while they tell us that our taxes are going to make the weather better. Our taxes are going to stop the climate crisis. Well, Canada makes up like 1.6% of the carbon emissions that are causing whatever damage they claim to be happening in the world. 1.6. China and India, they're causing the vast majority, but we're not telling them they need to stop it. They need to stop it. And I had one guy telling me, like, well, you have to imagine, where does the carbon that China is making, where does that go to? Is it for our products in North America, the consumer culture in North America? No, it's largely to sustain their own people. It's to sustain their own infrastructure. Largely, they're producing products for their own people. It don't pretend that China is the industrial complex in China is solely to support North America. I don't buy that, and I don't think any rational person should. So yeah, there's a lot going on. We got to deal with the people that got jabbed, the people that didn't want to get jabbed. We have to deal with the post propaganda on why we thought we were doing the right thing when we locked down your homes and we started forcing you to get experimental vaccines shoved into your system. And then the denial of any of the complications that happened post-jab, and the civil liberties that were robbed from us, and the propaganda that was put out that if you disagree with having an experimental vaccine shoved in your system, then you're obviously a misogynistic, racist, homophobe. Like, those two things go hand in hand. Well, sometimes they're coincidental. Sometimes they don't. And the narrative now is, if you have a problem with A, you must have a problem with B, you must have a problem with C, and you must have a problem with D. And sometimes they just work out that way. I'll tell you, I was one of the most woke liberal people you ever met for about 20 or 30 years. I was on board with all of the righteous causes, the virtue signaling, all of it. And a lot of it makes sense. We, as men, we do need to try to be better humans. We do need to be less bitter towards women. There's lots of men I know that are literally misogynistic. And for the record, misogynist means hatred of women. And I know a couple misogynists. And random light sexism is not misogyny, despite the narrative that a lot of people are putting out. Like, you see these people online and they're like, "You're a misogynist." Well, can you define that? And then they cry and run away because they don't even know the words they're using. So misogyny is hatred of women. And hopefully most men I know don't hate women. And so there is work that we need to do. White people need to recognize, there's some shitty things that white people have done. And I'm not going to minimize it by pointing out like the shitty things that other people have done, though that's legitimate. Let's not pretend that Europe has the market cornered on atrocity, all right? Like, there's this noble pre-colonial societies everywhere that just lived in peace and harmony with the universe, and suddenly these evil demons with white powdered wigs showed up and just started raping and killing people. That's not reality. There was human sacrifice, there was slavery, there was cannibalism, there was rape happening all around the world before colonialism showed up. So I'm not going to pretend that the average white Joe doesn't have work to do. And if we talk about accountability, I'm saying that every conscious male recognizes that there's some accountability and work that we need to do. And we're doing it. And we're in the process of it. We don't use certain words anymore. We're not as toxic as we used to be. But something else I'm noticing is that only certain people need to be accountable. In the times we're living in, and the narrative we're living in, there's this narrative and there's this dialogue that's happening that says that the European cisgendered heterosexual heteronormative male is the only person that needs to do work in our society. Now, we never address anybody else's stuff, because to address anybody else being accountable is racist. And I could give you, I could go off for hours about what needs to be accountable. Like, if we, for light examples, like if we really want to talk in Canada about missing and murdered Indigenous women, we need to address who's actually killing the Indigenous women. And that the RCMP had statistics that said 77% were the result, or high 70% were the result of Indigenous men. Well, that statistic's racist. You listen to these people and they're trying to tell you that these missing and murdered Indigenous women were exclusively like the result of white serial killers like Robert Pickton, or, man camps out at the mines or at the rigs, and they're just kidnapping these Indigenous women, raping and killing them. I'm sorry, that's not the case. That's not the case. Most of the violence towards Indigenous women comes from Indigenous men. Simply enough. Now, to own that would mean that part of truth and reconciliation is that you also need to be accountable for what you're doing to your own people. Now, I see the Every Child Matters protests. 100% Every Child Matters. 150% Every Child Matters. There's no reason in an ethical society that some children are neglected by their parents and other children are, lifted up and coddled by their parents. Ideally, every child does matter. They should have equal opportunity for education, equal opportunity for life, for liberty, for enjoyment. We also need to address the epidemic, the clear and present epidemic that's the elephant in the room that nobody wants to talk about, of child rape on reserves, incestuous child rape. This happens all across Canada, where a damaged people are continuing to damage their own people. And it's been a long time since the residential schools, and not all residential schools did this, but it's been a long time since the residential schools abused these children. But that's a narrative we don't want to talk about. It's the elephant in the room. Only some people need to be accountable. All Christian churches need to be accountable for some reprehensible behavior from some of their representatives. Like reprehensible behavior by, I guess, some Catholic priests, some Anglican priests, the nuns. But let's also not pretend, like the popular narrative says, that as soon as a child was walked into a residential school, they had their heads shaved and they were beaten and started getting raped. This is not the case. Like the narrative of all of these mass graves outside of these residential schools. If anybody, and this is an open request, an open offer, if anybody can show me the articles that say, here we are, we found proven bodies on these sites where all the articles say alleged graves, possible graves. If you can show me the article that says, here we are, we found the graves, then I will eat crow. I will apologize. I will say, yes, 100%. I guess a mass murder happened here. But right now, and I don't even know the date right now, September 29th, 2024, I haven't found a single article that says confirmed grave. It's alleged grave. It's possible grave based on an oral history. Well, if you want to carry the oral history about how kids work, when I was in elementary school, there was this house on the corner, and all the kids started spreading a rumor that there was a ghost in that house, and every once in a while the window blinds would open and nobody would be there. So soon there was 5 kids, and then there was 10 kids, and then there was 20, and then 30, and then 40. Legitimately, like there was up to maybe 50, 60 kids at recesses and lunch waiting for the ghost to open the drapes of this house, because we all said that's where the ghosts are. Until the school got a call that, like, can you get these kids to quit harassing or standing outside this house, because I have a handicapped daughter and she's really worried about what's going on out there. So if you would have asked those kids without correction, and they go and tell the next kid, well, that's a haunted house. That's a haunted house. That's a haunted house. So one of the oral histories I read during my reading on these alleged graves is that these are kids saying, oh, over there, that's where they bury all the dead bodies. Don't go over there. And then the next kid tells another kid, well, that over there, that's where they bury all the dead bodies. Don't go over there. And that's how an oral history starts, without necessarily proof. And then you say, well, you know, our culture respects oral history rather than actual facts, or, you know, actual, I guess, evidence. Evidence is secondary to oral history because it's our tradition. Well, that's also rumors and gossip and misinformation being spread. So I would like to see some evidence before I necessarily buy that the residential schools were equal to, I don't know, a death camp where you roll in and you just start getting processed through the most atrocious behavior ever. So that's an example of accountability. Some of us have to be accountable. We're expected to be accountable for like colonialism and for the residential schools, and we're expected to be accountable for, you know, the atrocities all through the Congo and South America and everywhere. And by we, I mean anybody who's European, anybody with a lack of melanin in their skin, anybody who comes from any northern Western European country is automatically broad brushed by individuals in this increasingly influential dialogue, that wants to villainize the European colonizer, whatever you want to call it, immigrants. They're immigrants. My family came here in like the 1800s. I think it was like 1860, 1850. And they plowed an unhospitable land. They lived in a fucking sod hut. To grow a little bit of sustenance. They came from places where my family's Irish, man. Like, they left a colonizing nation, or a colonized nation. Europe or England had colonized Ireland, there was a potato famine because they fed their own people the proper food, and then they left the Irish nothing but potatoes. So they fled a place that was colonized to a place that was advertised as free land. Come on down, settle it. And they worked their fingers to the bone to establish some farms, some rudimentary infrastructure, some civilization, some running water, some electricity. Only to be told that, like, as an immigrant, you stole our land. Well, how far are we going to go back? How far are we going to go back with the stolen land narrative? Am I going, okay, so you want me off the land because I'm an immigrant? Okay, well, first off, we'll send the recent immigrants back, right? Everybody who's come here in like the last 50 years, they go back first, and they go back wherever they're from. And then when they get there, everybody who's come to those lands in the last 50 years has to go back, right? So then eventually we get to the people that, like, I don't know, homesteaded this land in the 1800s. So my family is like fifth or sixth generation, So we finally go back to those people, and they say, okay, you got to go back to Ireland and Scotland. So we get back to Ireland and Scotland. But then are we allowed to say, okay, so my 23andMe, my genealogy says that this is my land, this is where my people are from. So then anybody who isn't, you go back home. So you deport all the Punjabi and the Bangladeshi and like the Pakistani people. They all have to go. But that part's racist. If you suggested that they're actually colonizing through their immigration, that part's racist. But so what we're saying is that how far does this go back? Okay, so then we take a look. Okay, so now we're all in our own respective areas. But when did we come here, and who did we move out of the way? Do we count the fact that, like, everywhere that humanity has gone from leaving, I guess, the Serengeti, has been a process of colonization and destroying any megafauna that they came into contact with? They through tool using and fire, we were able to skip oceans and show up in an area as an invasive species and destroy everything that was in our way and establish our tribes and our little colonies and our tribal way of life. And then slowly we were able to go all around the world, and specifically the Homo sapiens destroying every other hominid species that were out there. So by the virtue of being human, a Homo sapien, you are the result of a series of colonizations, of brutal colonizations and eliminations and genocides. But now, in 2024, with our elevated morality, we seem to think that we can call out that one person that we can use as an oppressor. See, they haven't done the math here, and the fact of the matter is, it's half-assed. It's a political move. It is absolutely an intentional finger-pointing towards a very select villain. A villain. And any history where you could finger point at a very select villain is a recipe for atrocity. And it doesn't matter if it's Stalin or Hitler or any other despot, Khmer Rouge, Pol Pot. If you can point your fingers and say those people right there are the villains and they are responsible for all of the hardships that I faced, all of the atrocities I faced, all of the tragedy and suffering that my family has endured, those people right there are responsible, it's okay to kill them. Take a look at the Rwandan genocide. You have the Tutsi and the Hutu. And I believe, I could be wrong, that the Hutu blamed the Tutsi because they were the upper echelon put there by the Dutch of the Rwandan society. So they had enough of this. They had enough of their perceived oppression by the upper echelon. So they justified chopping them to bits with machetes. Now, if you can point your finger at the enemy, that allows you to make, well, I love the fact that the left uses this all the time, to other them. And as long as you're allowed to other them, you can kill them with impunity because you no longer look at their humanity. So I'm accountable for what I've done in my life. Yeah, I've been a bigot. I've been a degenerate. I've had some crazy, wild experiences, drugs, sex, rock and roll. All these things I thought were important before I realized how much they were damaging me. And then I had to do a crazy amount of accountability and ownership of my behaviors towards other people, my behaviors towards drug and alcohol use, my behaviors towards my sexual behaviors, my behaviors towards my children or my child, my behaviors towards my partner. I needed to do that personal inventory to make myself better. I listened and I made changes in myself, which is, I think, what any responsible person should do. If you study world history, the evolution of religion, almost one consistent theme goes through the whole world philosophy. And it doesn't matter if you're from Asia or you're from the Middle East or you're from Europe, that you should strive to be a better person tomorrow than you were today. And that's a process of refinement and accountability and growth. Adaptation and overcoming the stuff that's in your way. Now, I only see, on the left at least, they've killed away, religious tradition, and it's purely on a guilt factor that you've done wrong and you need to repent, or even worse than needing to repent, we need to rake you over the coals and blame you, and you need to get in front of the crowd and be shamed. But at the same time, these same people don't want to be shamed for their degenerate behavior. And by degenerate, I'm talking about behavior that is so materialistic, so materially focused, that they don't think that there's anything greater than personal pleasure. So I know I'm all over the place. This is my ADD running wild right now. I'm squirreling here. So let's draw it back to that principle of accountability and self-work. Now, if we want to talk about accountability and self-work, we look at what we've done wrong in our life, what we continue to do wrong versus the litmus of what we know is right. And to do this, we need a hierarchy. We need hierarchies of what we know is good and what we know is wrong. In the progressive left, they've done away with hierarchy. Even the principle of hierarchy is a bad word. Now, you have to understand this. The term hierarchy is rooted in the word hieros, which is a Greek word which denotes authority, which denotes an order, a noble order. The first words of hierarchy were to give a decree to the orders of angels in Abrahamic religions. Okay?
Hierarchy is fundamental to our concept of order. To evaluate things, we need to set up an ideal, something perfect, so that we can measure things against it. Determine what is good, what is better, what is best, what is undesirable. The word hierarchy actually comes from a Greek word, hieros, that means sacred or holy. So the idea is a timeless order, a holy order. There are a lot of people challenging the idea that we should have hierarchy at all, that we should have ideals, that we should judge what is good, better, and best. And they're acting out of compassion, but unfortunately, they're also creating chaos, disorder, and disorientation. And that chaos will be exploited by more powerful actors, friends of their own.
But you can also apply this to an order of behavior. On the simplest line, we have our materialistic awareness, where we think I'm the only thing that's important, or if it can't touch it, or anything outside of the sphere of what's good for me isn't important. That's like root materialism. And if you want to become an evolved, generative, transcending individual, you start paying attention to what is important to more than myself. My family is more important than myself. My community is more important to myself than myself. My city, my nation, the globe, all of these things are more important than myself. And to understand that I have to pay attention to them, I might have to sacrifice what I want for the greater good. These are transcendent principles. Things like, loyalty, discipline, honor, generosity, compassion, all of these things are bigger than myself. They're transcendent virtues, leading higher levels than just materialism, right? I don't need money. I'm doing the right thing. I don't need my selfish needs met, my sense pleasures met, because I'm doing the right thing. Okay. This is a perennial tradition in all spiritual philosophies and pretty much, traditional Eastern and Western philosophy, that transcendent virtues are higher than man, right? Now, when we dial it right back to the middle level, we've got materialism. Now, if I focus on materialism and what's good for me is better than the greater good, the more I focus on that, I start disregarding what is good for the greater good, and I pay attention to I, me, and mine. I, me, and mine. So I want a different gender. I am important because I am not being paid attention to. I want sexual pleasure. I want money. I want power. All of these things essentially pull a person further and further into materialism, where they are the most important thing in the world and the greater world be damned. You no longer have trustworthiness and loyalty and the virtues. You have I, me, and mine. And the more that we drag ourselves into sense pleasure and to my right to have sex with whoever I want and my right that my personal identity is more important than the greater good, you're literally degenerating away from transcendent values. Now, on a spiritual level, depending if you're talking like Buddhism and Hinduism or Christianity, the more transcendent virtues you work towards are holy virtues. The holy virtues will get you in touch with the greater ecosystem, the universe, your Buddha nature, or God if you're a Christian, right? And the more you pay attention to your sense pleasures, the more you spiral into a self-obsessed world where you're the only important thing and all else be damned, and that's a hellish state. So, to back it up, if we take a look at pure philosophy, we have transcendent values and degenerate selfishness. So the transcendent values lead towards the greater good, and degenerate selfishness leads towards chaos. Chaos, because every single special interest individual thinks their special interest is important. And if you want to speak of hierarchy, I want to do a quick aside, and examine the people that are at these protests, all of these social justice people, and look at the demographic of people that are there fighting for somebody else's cause. Who are they? Take a look at them. What demographics are they from when these people are going down and fighting for the good of other people versus the people that are at these protests saying, I want for me. I'm not getting enough. You need to do things for me. Because these are two different hierarchies. If the only social justice you're interested in is self-serving, that's not really social justice. That's just your selfishness. And if you're out there protesting for the good of other people, for innocent people, that's kind of a virtue. I will give you that. That's not just virtue signaling. That is a virtue. But there's a difference in the demographics, and I'm not going to say who it is. And you could take a look at this between who are the ones protesting for other people and who are the ones protesting for themselves. The I, me, and mine crowd versus we need to do this for the good of other people. Now, this factors in with propaganda and narrative, where a lot of the progressive left narrative is feeding on what I would call toxic empathy, toxic sympathy, where they say, don't you know that you need to do this for the other people? And moral, generative people that are trying to fight for the greater good are manipulated by self-serving interests to take on a cause that isn't their own, when they haven't done the work for their own. And they've thrown the work for their own out the door. And they just say, we need to fight for the other. And it's to the point where these people want to self-flagellate. They've adopted the narrative that I'm so bad by virtue of my sexuality, my ethnicity, my orientation, that I'm willing to hear the narrative written by the few power seekers to disrupt the common good for, I don't know, profit, for control. When we ignore the overarching hypocrisy of these same individuals, how can you call yourself a victimized minority when you represent the greatest economic interests in media, in propaganda, in like music and movies and television and news channels, as well as banking and finance and global movers and shakers? How are you a victimized minority? But you can play this card over and over again with the don't you know what you did to me card? So you have no right to criticize me card. And you see this with Israel. You see it. Anybody who criticizes Israel is immediately called a Nazi. You see it over and over again. Over and over again. If you criticize me, you're an anti-Semite, and an anti-Semite is the worst thing in the world, so you don't want to be that, so you refuse to criticize me while I'm shooting unarmed children that threw a rock at a wall. Now, the victim hero allows people to use their degenerate impulse to seem virtuous. So they are self-oriented, but they're seeming virtuous. And that is a very toxic attitude. And it's manipulative, it's crazy manipulative. It's kind of interesting that, like, Sigmund Freud and Edward Bernays, also from the same demographic, wrote the books on mass psychology and wrote the books on manipulating mass psychology in order to get what they want. And once propaganda was no longer popular, they changed the name into public relations and advertising. And now governments manipulate psychology through propaganda to achieve their ends. And everything you're looking at on mainstream media is absolute propaganda. How can we not see it anymore? Like, the fact that any news source, and I'm not saying that right wing is better, because Trump's a fucking clown. Like, you guys that are buying that Trump is a noble person by any stretch of the imagination, when he's one of the most degenerate, self-serving motherfuckers I've ever seen in my life, that guy's not the great hope at all. I think that, like, all these power seekers are that's it. They're power seeking. They're looking to improve their own lot in life. They're looking to check out their gross income. They just want to cash in before the whole boat falls. They're trying to tell you that they're going to save the boat when they just want to get access to the coffers before it sinks. So these people, they keep trying to manipulate our desires to stay in power. They manipulate our fear. They manipulate our greed. They manipulate our need to belong in order to steal money, steal energy, steal our time, and nobody recognizes that it's all fucking propaganda. It's all propaganda for the power of the few. And when you're actually trying to lead a moral life, and you're trying to do no harm to people, and you're trying to do no harm to your environment, maybe even you consider those animals, you start realizing how corrupt the entire system is. And it's manipulated by a few for the profit of the few, and you end up recognizing that you're basically being conditioned to be livestock. You are livestock in a farm for taxes, in a resource farm. Then that money gets allotted by an elite few to their cronies, to their lobbyists, to the special interests that are allowed to play the manipulation game. And in the meanwhile, working class, moral people that just want to do their jobs, feed their families, make sure their families are safe, and that the little property that they've managed to attain through the blood, sweat, and labor and time that they've sacrificed, that little property stays their own. You're called oppressive. You're called oppressive by a manipulative system that wants to play the game. They're playing the game. So I'm going to tell you a bit of a story here. We're going to go back in time. Now, imagine that everything that we've heard in the last 70 years, this has all been manipulative propaganda. 80 years, okay? Just imagine. So 1930s, there's a group. Actually, you can go all the way back to Marx, again, a member of a certain demographic. These people, they got tired of being oppressed, quote unquote oppressed, and they started writing a philosophy. Now, like the leaders of the Marxist party in the very beginning were not working class people. They were the son of wealthy lawyers, and they had money. They had money to meet, they had money to organize, they had money to sit and pontificate about the technicalities of the human existence, existential thought, and oppression and non-oppression. And these guys, these rich fucking lawyers' kids, sat down and they came up with the idea that the working class was being oppressed. The proletariat was being oppressed by the business owners, by the capitalists, and the people that were making money off the back of the working class we needed to steal the means of production from them and give it back to the normal man, which in some ways maybe was a virtuous cause. It was a virtuous cause, but it's predicated on a potential falsehood, a falsehood of oppression and exploitation. Okay. Now that's a very important thing to say, because not every worker is being exploited by the business owner. Not everybody is being exploited in a system of work and payment. But the narrative is being built that you are being oppressed. This is the Marxist narrative of the haves and the have-nots, the oppressed and the oppressors, and it's all predicated on resentment for those that can accomplish more than you. And this is a very important thing to remember, that the fundamental, I guess, pivot point of Marxism is predicated on the theory that you resent those that have accomplished more than you. So in the 30s, there was an offshoot of the Marxist thought. Again, another group of Jewish Marxists got together, and they again, rich kids, they founded a new school of thought called the Frankfurt School. And they took this idea of the oppressed and the oppressor and, seizing the means of power, and they started applying it to different levels of oppression. And they said, well, if our people have been ejected from like 108 countries or 109 countries or 108 places, we obviously are oppressed. Now, we never addressed the fact why they were ejected or why they were being judged or why these systems like said, you can't live here. It's only that they haven't been. I've been kicked out of 109 bars. It's always the bar's fault. But neither there, here nor there, they decided to sit down and talk about the virtue of oppression. The virtue of oppression, where if you are the victim of oppression, then you are powerful in that you can say, this person hurt me. This person right here hurt me, and I need to overthrow them because you are oppressing me by nature, and I don't have a voice, and I need a voice, and I need power, and I need to reclaim power from those people that oppressed me. So this is called the Frankfurt School. There's existential elements to what they were talking about, but at the ground roots, they were talking about the oppressor oppressing anybody. And they started applying this economic principle of that the worker needs to overthrow the property owner to social aspects where, let's say, the less popular sexuality needs to overthrow normal sexuality. The oppressed gender needs to overthrow the dominant gender. The less privileged ethnic people need to overthrow the more privileged ethnic people. And these were intersections of oppression. And this is the Frankfurt School in the 30s, and this is the theory they started coming up with, where all of the oppressed need to overthrow the oppressors, so we're a level society. We're a level society. Well, there was other things happening in the 30s in Germany that you may have heard about. In the Weimar Republic is what it was, where, certain demographics of people were controlling a lot of the nightclubs and the pornography, and they were advertising the first transgender surgeries. And it was like a decadent utopia. Of course, they were poor as hell, so mothers were forced to prostitute their children, and sex tourists all around Europe would go to Germany to fuck kids and animals and elderly people or do whatever debaucherous stuff that they chose to. And at the same time, because there's this school of thought that says, well, if normal sexuality is oppressive, then deviant sexuality should be liberated. Well, okay, sure, cool. At that time, there was a large public movement of people that had enough of this, and they rose up and they started burning books, and the pendulum swung, and there was jackboots coming out on the street. So the Frankfurt School decided that they were going to run away from Germany. They said, fuck this, we got to go to America, otherwise we're going to end up in a camp or on the end of a rope. So they ended up going to New York City. I believe it's Columbia University, but you can look all this up. Frankfurt School, universities, USA. They ended up starting in New York City, and they propagated there. They reset up their school of thought and their school of philosophy, and then they transplanted to Berkeley, California. So New York City and California became the hotbed for this specific new branch of Marxist thought. And this new branch of Marxist thought became known as critical theory. Critical theory criticized any normality. Anything that was a commonly accepted value needed to be examined, dismantled, and torn apart and rebuilt, right? And it incorporated intersecting levels of oppression. So if you feel that you've been oppressed, maybe you're handicapped and everybody else is normal, you're crazy, everybody else is normal, you're deviant sexuality and everybody else has normal sexuality. All the normality needed to be dissected and torn apart, and you need to examine why it's normal. Why it's normal. Why are you attracted to the partner you're with? You need to examine that, and you need to see if that comes from your internal biases and see if you're a bigot for doing that, and if you're oppressing anybody for being attracted to your partner, and if you feel you're oppressive, don't you have a moral obligation to not oppress people? So this narrative got carried over and carried over and carried over, and it became the norm of the left-leaning academia in most of North American higher education, in post-secondary education. So you go to universities, and the liberal think tank is the large that is the way. And if you come into these environments, like these university academic environments, and you have a conservative or a traditionalist viewpoint where I'm saying, sorry, normal is good. Normal is healthy. The status quo is healthy. And deviancy needs to be examined for the damage that deviancy eventually leads to. Then you are silenced, you are kicked out of class, you get failing grades, you get your funding revoked, you no longer can work. And so this narrative, it rolled and it rolled and it rolled over the last 80 years to the environment, the popular environment we have now. Not only is this happening in post-secondary education, the people that graduated those schools went into, high school education, elementary school education. They went into the social sciences. They went into social work. They went into the medicine field. They went into psychology. They went into sociology. They went into, the sciences. They went into medical schools. They became doctors. So all of these people that have been indoctrinated with this model, this neo-Marxist model of critical theory, that if you feel that you've been oppressed, then that oppression and that shame needs to be removed from you. And we need to examine that shame and we need to dismantle it because you're just a normal person like everybody else. That is now what I would consider, and I call it compromised academia, because it's been ideologically compromised. So that's a very long story telling us, it's a bridge story, telling us how we got to where we are right now, where common sense is being thrown out the door because people feel offended by basic right and wrong, basic morality, basic good and bad, basic biology. We're not in a war of left versus right, people. We're in a war of right versus wrong.
To us, this sounds like hatred, and to me, that is not the Christianity I've learned about. Yeah. That is not tolerance.
Yeah. Your love tastes like bitterness to me. My love tastes like bitterness like to you. Yeah, because we don't serve the same master, brother. You and I, we don't serve the same master. That's
who do I serve?
You'll figure it out. Y'all have a great day.
The traditionalist, the famous traditionalist, René Guénon, talks about how the definition of Satanism is when you take what is right and what is good and you invert it. So society begins thinking what is wrong is right and what is good and is bad. When you have a natural order of things, a hierarchy, and you put it on its ear, and what is immoral is suddenly moral, and what is moral is suddenly considered bad, you're living in definition a satanic society.
It's short for virtuous pedophiles.
What?
Not virtuous as in they're better than everyone because they're attracted to children, but virtuous like having moral standards and a sexual orientation that they have no control over, like the rest of us.
When the person who's like an OnlyFans pornographer is considered more virtuous than the priest or the nun, because those nuns and colonialism and residential schools, and the narrative is that these moral people that struggled their whole life to do the right thing for themselves, they sacrifice themselves for the greater good, those people are oppressive. But this girl who's shoving a pylon up her ass, she's noble because she's a queer sex worker. We're living in a society of inverted morality. Legitimately, it's inverted morality. When good is bad and bad is good. When the moral, normal, healthy people out there, let's not go with normal, because normal is even like, what is normal? You can see health and disease. Healthy habits, healthy outcomes versus diseased habits and diseased outcomes. And we're living in a profoundly sick society. We're living in a sick society where we have a revolving door justice system where somebody stabs up a bunch of people, he gets put in jail, and they say, well, what about his trauma? Don't you know he's a victim, so therefore he's not responsible for his behavior, and we shouldn't punish him. So we give him a year, and he gets out and he stabs up more people. Well, in my mind, this guy has forfeited his humanity. He's chosen to become a monster. So you kind of let monsters deal with monsters. You don't reform them, you extinguish them. So I'm going to go through here, and like this is the principle that all the Pitboss Review Instagram page, that all of the media I produce is based on. Where have we gone wrong? And when I say I'm a traditionalist, all these people they tend to think, oh, you're some sort of right-wing Christian. I'm like, no, man, I believe in like right and wrong. And I meet Christians and they're like, oh, your values, you're obviously a Christian. I'm like, no, man, I just believe in right and wrong. I've studied world religions. I know all kinds of stuff about faith and myths and mysticism. And I've studied the common veins, the commonality between all of these philosophies.
However, the teachings of the traditionalists should not, in any sense, be taken to mean that they seek, as it were, to repeat the past, or indeed simply to draw a distinction between the present and the past. Theirs is not a nostalgia for the past, but a yearning for the sacred. And if they defend the past, it is because in the pre-modern world, all civilizations were marked by the presence of the sacred. As I understand it, in referring to tradition, they refer to a metaphysical reality and to underlying principles that are timeless, as true now as they have ever been and will be. And by way of contrast, in referring to modernism, they refer to a particular, though false, definition of reality, a particular, though false, manner of seeing and engaging with the world that, likewise, is distinguished not by time, but by its ideology.
And when you do it, there's a few principles. Do unto others as you would have them do unto you. And try to do no harm, but take no shit. And a person has a physical, emotional, psychological, and spiritual responsibility to try to be better tomorrow than they were today. To become more healthy, have more longevity tomorrow than they did today. An individual has those responsibilities, and you can carry this over. This is another traditionalist thought, that the microcosm is also reflected in the macrocosm. So if, as an individual, I should worry about my physical health, my psychological health, my emotional health, and my spiritual health, I should work to be better tomorrow than I was today, then that also applies to my community, my city, and my nation. That a nation needs to protect and maintain its physical health, its psychological health, its emotional health, and its spiritual health. But what we're seeing is a degradation, a degeneration of these principles. These players that want to dismantle what is good and just and functional and normal, want to take something that isn't broken, fix it. They don't even know how they're going to fix it. They don't know what they're going to replace it with. All that they're predicated on is dismantling what works. Because they say, well, I don't feel good. You're living in the most rich society in the world. Even the homeless people have access to indoor plumbing. They have access to food. They have access to clean water. You know, they aren't plagued by the bubonic plague, literally plagued. But we're still pretending that they're technically being systemically, marginalized, systemically marginalized. You're marginalizing me, and I represent everybody that's been marginalized. We need to make a level playing field. How can you make a level playing field for somebody with an IQ of 70 versus a person with an IQ of 130? How can you do that? Because obviously they aren't equal. Or somebody whose life choice is sticking a needle in their arm and a crack pipe in their mouth versus the grandma that's donating her spare time at, the thrift store or the soup kitchen. These are not equal. But we're pretending they are. And I get it. Because if you look at the core root of every individual, our core humanity, and depending on your system of belief, we are all children of God. We all have the potential to be good. We are all humans. And we need to recognize that we all have humanity. But our choices make a difference. What we do with our time and our energy and our values makes a difference. We have free will to some degree. So we have a right to say, why are you making unhealthy choices? Why are you not living in reality? Why are you trying to rewrite and revise, reality through changing the meanings of words? You're changing the definitions of words, and therefore you can change the definitions of reality. When some people are still adhering to the dictionary definitions of man and woman from 10 years ago, 12 years ago, and it's quite obvious, basic biology, but then you can play the compromised academic game of oppression and imagination and identity, and you can change the word gender to mean identity, and you can say that men have babies, and you're considered a progressive, rational person because at least you're not oppressing somebody.
lots of genders. There is transgender, there is agender, people that don't believe they have a gender at all.
Yeah, but you can't have that. You
can't have that, it's not a law.
Yeah, no, it's not a law, but it's our opinion, we just don't agree with it. We just think it's all just...
If you have a vagina, you're a girl. If you have a penis, you're a boy.
Yeah.
But cisgender is not necessarily the way to be. You were talking about the fact that cisgender is the norm, that you identify with the gender of the sexual organs that you're born with, or you're with. That's basically what you're saying.
Yeah.
Which is really despicable.
How? When it's
if I called my mum right now, my mum would be on my side.
If I called my mum, she'd say.
Well, that's very sad as well then.
How is it?
Loads of people agree with that. There's only a small majority of people who actually think that.
And why do you think we have so many problems in the world with homophobia?
Yeah, but
because
that's
of
not
people
homophobia, that's gender.
Yeah.
Yes,
I'm fine with lesbians and gay people.
Same.
I've got nothing against them.
Same.
But gender there is a link between it, and you're saying that people can't change
No, they
who they want
can't.
to be.
They can't. Unless you get a penis
wrong.
attached. No, I'm not.
You're confusing sex and gender.
No, I'm not though. Because if
Yes,
you have a
you are.
vagina, you're a girl. If you have a penis, you're a boy.
Yeah, you can't have a vagina and be a girl, but then
Gender
Unless you
identify
get
as
surgery, and even then,
Gender
because
is
you've got
about
those genes.
how you identity.
I just
How you
don't agree with
identify.
it.
Yeah,
But
just
it's
not.
not an opinion
Yes,
that
it
we
is.
express in this
Yes,
school.
it is.
No, it's not. And if you don't like it, you need to go to a different school. So
I did go to a
I'm
different
reporting you to Miss Willis. You need to have a proper educational conversation about equality, diversity and
I ain't doing
inclusion.
it. My mum
Because
doesn't
I'm
let
not
me do
having
that.
that expressed in my lesson. When I'm teaching you about you can be who you want to be,
Everyone else
how
thinks
you
it.
identify is up to you.
Everyone else thinks it, they just don't say it, because then all this happens.
Maybe because they're polite and maybe they're sensitive.
I haven't said anything in all of the lessons I've been in. It's just because they turned around and started saying something. So I said, how can you identify as a cat when you're a girl?
Oh, well, they're now writing a statement. I would imagine that you'll be asked to write a statement as well.
We will.
Yeah, we will.
Well, I'm going to tell you, I've been in psych wards before when I was a drug addict. I can take you down to the psych ward right now and introduce you probably to 4 people that legitimately believe in their heart of hearts that they're Jesus Christ. Does that make it so? Should we respect their identity because they're delusional? But wait, if we had 500 of these people and they had enough of a lobby and they were able to say, I'm a victim, the weaponized empathy would say, well, I guess we have to accept that they're all Jesus Christ. No, these are delusions. Because 1 in 1,000 doesn't make the rules for 1,000. But we continue to play the game that as long as we're hurting somebody, like that's one of those revisions, those language revisions, that if somebody is offended, you carry that over, that means I'm hurt. But if I'm hurt, that means that I've been injured. And if I've been injured, that means that somebody injured me. And if somebody's injured me, they committed an act of violence. Now, carry that again. I'm going to repeat it just so you didn't miss it. If I'm hurt, if I'm offended, I'm hurt. And if I'm hurt, I've been injured. And if I've been injured, you injured me. And if you injured me, you committed violence. So now, So now you can say, if you've offended me, you've committed violence against me. That's the logical conclusion from these people. And I'm a victim. So you have no right to victimize me. And I could carry this over that if you offended me on an ideological level, you disagreed with my identity, you disagreed with my behavior, disagreed with my actions, you disagreed with something that I did, and you offended me and hurt me and committed violence, well, that's a hate crime because you committed violence against me on an ideological reason.
Right, have you ever been paid to be hate crimed? Well, I have, so let me tell you about it. Okay, so yesterday I was at work serving this family that was sitting there like the 3 wise men. And then all of a sudden, out of the mom's mouth, I hear the trigger words, non-binary and gender fluid. Oop! And so basically, the mom was trying to explain to the dad what it meant to be non-binary or gender fluid. After a few minutes go by, the dad responds in the same way that every guy that looks like him would and says, I understand where they're coming from, but if you're biologically a male or a female, that's what you are. And then I'm standing there. So after a little bit of time, I march up to my colleague like I'm about to tattletale on a kid that just stole my toys. And she's like, yeah, I hate to tell you, the entire time they have been referring to you as he or him. Great. So that adds a little bit of insult to injury. And before you ask, no, they didn't tip well.
So then the Canadian government introduces these bills, these online harm acts. I think it's C-63, and they're trying to tell you that if you disagree with somebody and you criticize them online, You committed an act of hate crime against them. It's an ideological violence you commit against them when you basically said men can't have babies. Like, I remember when Twitter would ban your account. They would shut down your account when you said men can't have babies. I'm sorry. And that was a hate crime. That was a hate crime. Like, our media is so compromised by these ideologues that even my Pitboss review, I get fact checked all the time. And it's not. It's not. Like, you can find the evidence. You can go look it up. This is legitimate stuff I'm talking about. You can Google it. You can source it. This isn't all speculation and opinion. I've got a library sitting behind me right here, which has the documentation of all of the stuff that I'm talking about. So,
paying attention to what's happening in Scotland right now, where a law has just been passed, and in Ireland, where they're considering a similar law. They're called hate speech laws. And Ireland has said the quiet part out loud, which is that they shouldn't define what hate speech is, because that would limit the amount of prosecutions they can have under the law. Most of the governments in the Western democracies around the world have religious freedom and free speech guarantees in their governing documents, but they're not worth the paper that they're written on when activists and judges are able to come in and gut those protections, and when citizens are too apathetic to stand up for their rights, to insist on their enforcement. The United States is the last Western country in the world that is resisting this type of government censorship. Do you taste the bitter fruit of lies in our culture? Because when laws embrace those lies, what we know comes is injustice, misery, and human suffering.
They play the game. They play the game and they say, if you injured me, you hurt me, you committed a hate crime against me, and now I can report you as being a hate monger. Like in 1984, where they have everybody turning in their neighbor. That's a noble thing. You're doing it for EngSog, English socialism.
How many genders are there?
I feel like there's two, because like transgender.
No, Tara, stop. Don't say that on camera.
Yeah, but I feel like you either switch from a boy to a girl.
No,
and
stop,
you can
stop,
switch
stop,
back and forth.
Stop. I feel like it doesn't matter. It doesn't matter. Whatever you want to be, it's fine. It's okay.
Yeah, but I feel like they switch back and forth. Like,
yeah, but like it doesn't really matter. Like, there's like you can be anything you want to be. It doesn't matter. Come on,
yeah.
Stop.
All right, I'm sorry.
So they want to report you without consequence. But then on top of that, they have this vigilante attitude that if they disagree with your philosophies, they disagree with your morality, they disagree with your political opinions, they have a right to be violent against you. Because you committed a violence first. You created ideological violence by offending them. So if you committed a violence, they have a right to self-defense with physical violence.
Why do you think they're getting that kind of representation? I mean, it's clearly was aggressive violence.
You suck. Fuck you. Fuck you, you're not wanted. Fuck you, you're a fucking idiot. You're a fucking idiot.
I don't know what to say.
Fuck
I guess
you.
these police officers
Fuck
are mostly
you,
indoctrinated as well.
Here,
they're afraid of the mob.
Because you're a fucking idiot.
I think they're afraid that if they do anything to actually keep law and order, that they'll end up being on the end of this verbal abuse. So it's just cowardice from everybody all around.
People probably want to know, how do you keep your composure?
Fuck you!
What's that?
How do you keep your composure?
Fuck you! 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 Hey! Get your fucking ass up there! You son my phone, my purse, my dog.
And so you get the narrative that, like, we must punch all fascists. Well, what's your definition of a fascist? Anybody you disagree with? Somebody with conservative viewpoints, that's fascism, and it's okay to punch fascists, so there you go.
I know he's not a fascist, but it's more just of getting the community together to just go against him.
A lot of people said he's not actually a fascist, so then why call him a fascist?
Well, I don't know the exact definition of a fascist, so I don't know if he is or isn't a fascist.
Or I'm allowed to, expose you publicly with all of your personal information. If I don't like the fact that you said that, gender-bending individuals have psychological disorders, that this needs to be treated, that's now called this fancy word, transphobic. And if you're transphobic, you're obviously hateful. And if you're hateful, I have a right to tell the world that you're a hateful bigot and give them your name and your address and your place of work and basically allow the most radical, whack job, violent individual on the internet to have access to you and your family personally. That's an acceptable act of vigilantism in these progressive communities. That if you find somebody that you can accuse of being hateful because I don't like the language they're using, I have a right to be violent against them. I have a right to leave the most vulnerable information about you out for the most whack job, unhinged, unhealthy, imbalanced individual that's part of my community to grab a butcher knife and find where you live. That's an acceptable thing. And they encourage it. And dogpiling, they encourage dogpiling where you can't have a good faith conversation with these individuals anymore. They don't want to hear it. Even as like a centrist, when I was actually very, very woke and I was leaning away and I'm like, hey man, what about this? And what about that? And do you really think that this like Fallon Fox that like totally destroyed a girl's orbital bone in an MMA fight, who's a biological male, should really be fighting like in a combat sport against other, against biological females when she's a biological male? Oh my God, that you're a bigot, you're a right wing, blah, blah, blah. And I'm like, well, no, I'm just asking a legitimate question as a woke person, as a quote unquote ally to the community. Shouldn't we really talk about this? Well, no, because you're using the same talking points that bigots use, so therefore you're a bigot. Well, yeah, I'm also a vegetarian. Like Hitler, I guess, right? So it doesn't even matter. It doesn't even matter to these people. There's so much divide, and they're so eager for the victim hero. But the problem with the victim hero and playing the victim hero is that when you play the victim hero, don't touch, hands off. You don't touch the victim. You don't touch the victim. You never punish the victim. You never hold the victim accountable because we always believe the victim. And you wouldn't want a victim blame and you wouldn't want a victim shame. So nobody touches the victim while they progressively, inch by inch by inch by inch, take more liberties. And they do more atrocious things. And as soon as you say, you can't do that, well, don't you know how much I've been victimized in my life? I was a victim of A, B, C, D, E, F, G, homophobia, transphobia, anti-Semitism, slavery, colonialism, whatever the victim monstrosity that they can pull to justify reprehensible behavior. And as a European heterosexual, cisgendered male, heterosexual, biological male, you are the oppressor of everything that I stand for. So you have to be accountable for your atrocities, but we don't have to be accountable for ours. And that is the most ridiculous narrative I have ever heard in my life. It's a double standard. It's hypocrisy. It's bigotry in itself. And they're looking to demonize a very specific gender orientation, ethnicity, yeah, like that's, I don't understand it. So I'm going to go through a couple like relatively recent posts. Like you can go through the Pitboss review. I'm at the point where I have over 4,000 memes. And if you went all the way down, I don't know anybody who's got the patience to go all the way down to the bottom of my Instagram account, which is Pitboss review. You'll see my woke stuff. You'll see me tearing apart Trump. You'll see me talking about being an ally and being a vegetarian or vegan for a little while until all of this stuff started coming out and I started noticing things. And when you notice things, you keep noticing things. You can't put it back in the box. You can't put it back in the box. And I can go through, Jesus Christ, I've got like 4,000 of these and I can continue to go through these memes and just point out hypocrisy after hypocrisy after hypocrisy. Like, it's interesting when we start talking about people's civil rights as opposed to their responsibilities. Everybody's got human rights. I got the right to do this. I got the right to do that. What about your responsibility to the greater good, right? So we've got this thing where how do subway cars keep getting away with this? We've got a UK article where they say there's a shocking spike in violent crimes against women on Britain's trains. Violent crimes and sexual offenses. But it's the trains that are doing it because they never really want to point out who is actually committing the crimes. It's at the point where they don't even want to print the names of the people that are committing the crimes because it's so evident who is committing the crimes. And I find that hilarious. And this goes on and on and on. So we've got, let's see here. What else is very, very interesting? We've got a generation, and it's funny because I am definitely in that generation of degeneracy where I've destroyed a lot of my body. I'm tattooed from my neck to my ankles, right? And I was involved with subcultures for a long time because mainstream culture I felt it didn't include me. So maybe we need a revision of mainstream culture. But when you see what used to be counterculture, antisocial, revolutionary individuals that were breaking boundaries, now mainstream kids are covered in tattoos. And when you meet them and they meet somebody who was once an outlaw or a rebel or somebody who was actually edgy, they say, your attitude is problematic. Your attitude is problematic. So me, I've been there and done that. I've been there and done that. I've done the drug addiction. I've done the sexual libertine thing. I've done the alcohol abuse. I'm covered in tattoos. And I recognize how many toxic things that did to my life, how my viewpoints needed to be revised, how my behavior needed to be revised. So I was raised on pornography. I had sexual interference when I was young. So I had a certain viewpoint of sex that was absolutely manipulated by this media, by this content. And as an adult, I realize how many mistakes I made in my life and how my views are really toxic and I need to revise them. But I also recognize that they're being reinforced by pornography. So I say, pornography is wrong. It's doing bad things to people. I know I'm a victim of a life of porn abuse. And then they say, well, you're toxic because you're against sex workers. A woman's right to choose whatever she wants to do. And you're saying, well, man, these women are being damaged by the expectations of men that they're getting paid $5 to show them a picture of their asshole. And the men are being damaged by looking at these women as sexual objects. And the entire industry is advocating harmful behavior and harmful activities aggressive anal sex or ass to mouth and all of this stuff. And it's not healthy. It's not healthy physically, psychologically, emotionally, or spiritually. It's an unhealthy behavior that's being encouraged and being ingested by people because it gives them a dopamine fix. And it causes huge problems in individuals, in individual relationships. We've got nurses in elementary schools now that are finding that 10 and 11-year-old children are reenacting sexual behavior seen on pornography, legitimate, forced oral attempts to ejaculate on faces. And this has become normal life, people. When did this become normalized? When I was young, this was degenerate shit. We knew it was degenerate shit. We were in the underworld. But now this is normal life. Is this my fault? Is this our fault? Am I part of the generation that normalized the toxic? I'm sorry. I'm sorry. There's nothing wrong with having a husband and a wife and a couple kids and going for a picnic and being sober and learning healthy, holistic activities. That is the new counterculture. I hate to fucking clue you in, but if you have the same opinions and the same values and the same pastimes as mainstream media, as the TV, the movies, the music, as every news thing, polyamory is the new thing. Sex toys are the new thing. Degenerate multi-partner, gender bending, species bending stuff is the new acceptable thing. You're not edgy. You're just diving into the demonic. You're diving into the most toxic stuff. And these people have stolen our country. And we spent the last 75 years socially engineering us to think that a family, man, woman, and children, and a holistic lifestyle is evil. They're trying to say that that is toxic, that the family is toxic, that a happy couple is toxic, that raising your boys to be men and raising your ladies to be feminine, that's all toxic. It all needs to be dismantled. It all needs to be torn apart, and they have nothing that they're going to replace it with. Because really, toxicity can't build anything new. It only can destroy what progressive, real progression has built. Evil can't build anything new. It can only corrupt and destroy what good things have built. So now we've got a ridiculous time when we're importing a value system, a contrary value systems, and we're nurturing contrary value systems in our country. Whether we're having rigid fundamentalist conservative religions coming in that really believe that women are second-rate citizens and that gay people need to be stoned, and we're defending it because if you criticize that, you're an Islamophobe, or we're having degeneracy bubble up from the bottom, where we're you could fuck whatever you want, man. Who are you to judge? Well, I'm a normal, moral human being. That's who I am to judge. I'm a person with an invested interest in a safe society. That's who I am to judge. I'm a father. I'm a business owner. I'm a tax-paying citizen. Watching all of these things be corrupted by an increasingly immoral society. That's who I am to judge. I'm a person working on himself, seeing a lot of people not working on themselves or even corrupting themselves. That's who I am to judge. And this isn't hate. I want a better world, and I can show you the better world. I've got the plan. We have the plan. It's out there. It's been written. It's been done. It's a pretty simple model. Be good, be moral, show self-restraint, show dignity, show gravitas, dignitas. These things are there. They've been established. We have a society that's been operating functionally for like how many thousands of years, and in 2 generations, we're just watching it like spiral. We're watching it degenerate. You know, people seem to think that being a sex worker and a stripper is a virtuous employment. You're getting money from men that hate you while complaining that you're being objectified sexually. If you didn't objectify yourself sexually, you have no marketable skills. But, you know, getting married and having one sponsor, a husband, is oppression somehow. Really, really strange. And then you have these people out here, you know, what is it? It's not selfish not to want kids. It's selfish to have children. And this narrative, it's selfish to have children in this climate. It's selfish to have children in this environment. It's selfish to have children when so many other children are unwanted, is only being marketed to a certain demographic. Working class people like me, empathetic people like me. It's not the people that are coming to this country with 12 kids in a 1-bedroom apartment. It's being marketed to the people that should be having children. It's being marketed to the people that care about their community, that care about restraint, that dignity, discipline in our society, that have an infrastructure of law and order, that have an infrastructure of, you know, hygiene. And we're the ones being told that we shouldn't have children. The intelligent thinking individuals that care about their communities shouldn't have children. So we can say, well, the birth is on the decline. The birth rate's on the decline. We can't afford houses in the future, right? Like, I can't afford... Will my child ever own a home? Will my child be raped on the way to the grocery store? Will my child be stabbed in school? Maybe I shouldn't have another child. And then they say, well, why is the birth rate declining? Oh, I read another article about how it's selfish for me to have children. Why is the birth rate declining? We need to import people to replace the declining birth rate. And then the people that are imported have a significantly different value system than the ones that actually established this country, the ones that created a functional infrastructure. They have a significantly different value system, but you're not allowed to say that. You're not allowed to say that. And this isn't based on the color of their skin. It's based on the values of a contrary value system. Some of these people come from an honor culture where if they feel offended, they've got the right to fucking enact physical violence. Some of these people feel that if their family loses shame, they have a right to kill their daughter. Clitorectomy is normal in some of these cultures. You know, rape is normal in some of these cultures. If you're not of my religion, it's not against the religion to rape you. But if you say this out loud, it comes off as being phobic. And oh my God, our society is so afraid to be phobic. So afraid to be phobic. I've got a Muslim friend of mine. He's a therapist and he works in social services. He can't say to a client that he agrees that there's only men and women. At least he can't say it out loud because he will lose his job in social services. Literally, he will lose his job. And if he loses his job, he gets deported for saying that, like, there's 2 genders. And I meet people in the academic world that get grants, government grants, that are obligated to get somebody on their team from the LGBTQIA2S community, whatever the alphabet is today. And they're obligated to get people for this, or they won't get their funding. So what they have to do, and legitimately, this is a quote from a person in the arts that does like work with art grants regularly. They go out of their way to try to find gay males or lesbians as soon as possible so they don't have to engage with the trans activists because they are so hard to get a project accomplished with. These people are problematic by nature. They like to argue. They like to confront. They like to dismantle. They want to challenge. They don't want to get a job done. They just want to challenge. So in my hope of hope, these people, like these progressives, are going to eat themselves. That this intersectional kind of mud is going to eat itself. Because where's it going to lead to? Where's it going to lead to? You really think that we're going to have a society, a leveled society of one hum where everybody talks the same, there's no inflection in voice, everybody is the same color, nobody says everything, we are so happy that we are all the same? No, that's never going to happen. There's sharp, there's dull, there's fast, there's slow, there's smart, there's stupid, there's athletic, and there's the opposite of athletic. But, you know, we want to normalize that athletic is oppressive and fat is virtuous. Unhealthy is virtue, and you know, healthy is sickness, because if you say healthiness is good, you're obviously saying unhealthiness is bad. And what about those people that are unhealthy? You don't have a right to judge them. You don't have a right to judge the people that are unhealthy. That's unhealthy shaming. And you don't want to be responsible for shaming somebody, do you? Well, maybe we should, because a society without shame becomes a very dangerous place very quickly. I'm going to repeat that again because it's very, very important. A society without shame becomes a dangerous place very quickly, because people that will do what they want without consequence, without self-reflection, without restraint, create a dangerous environment for everybody. Shame keeps a society functional. And all of these people, they want to seize the means of production. They want to seize the reins of power. They want to run the system. And then when they finally get it, they don't have a clue how the shit works. And this happens over and over and over again. People without shame, when they get put in positions of power, get arrested, or they film pornography in Congress. You see all of these politicians getting arrested with child exploitation material. You know, there's these narratives, like in Toronto, there was a coffee shop and it was called The Anarchist, and it was a anti-capitalist establishment, you know, pay what you can. Well, of course, they had to shut down. You're opening an anti-capitalist business? How can you pay your employees? And then the employees will protest and say, well, you're exploiting us by virtue of employing us, and we want to take over the means of production. And they don't know where they get the coffee from. They don't know how to operate the register. They don't know how to pay their bills. They don't know what licensing's involved with this stuff. And then it falls apart. It happened again. Like, I think it was in Portland. There was a trans and lesbian bar and or cafe bar. And these people protested. They said, you're exploiting us. You're othering us. You aren't inclusive enough. We need to take over the means of production. And then when they did it, they didn't know how to pay rent. The landlord is like, what are you doing? You got to get out. I'm selling the business. Screw it. I'm selling the building out from under you. Right? And then, like, every once in a while, you'll have one of these social media systems, one of these social media platforms that, like X or Twitter, that gets bought by somebody who isn't infected by this Marxism rebranded. They aren't affected. They're uninterested. So they will open up the platform for free speech. And then, oh my God, free speech is hate speech. You're allowing hate speech. You're allowing people to say things that challenge my ego. We need to shut it down. We can't have an open forum of ideas. We can't have anybody criticizing our methodology, because if it's put up to scrutiny, the holes shine through. It's like Swiss cheese. It's a philosophy of Swiss cheese, full of hypocrisy, full of short-sightedness, full of half-assed justifications for the most degenerate behavior known. And when you put it up against the light, it shines through. And these people don't want that. They don't want that. They don't want to be examined. They don't want an open forum of ideas, so they'll just label it. What you're saying is bigotry. What you're saying is homophobia. What you're saying is transphobia. What you're saying is racist. And then everybody runs away from saying it. They don't want accountability for their behavior. Only guys like you or me or, you know, conservatives need to be accountable, but nobody over there needs to be accountable. Man, you got kids watching some dude twerk his asshole in front of them in a thong, and you're saying this is moral and good because it's teaching this child inclusiveness? Well, it's a dying society that puts tolerance over everything else, regardless of the thing being tolerated, right? I don't want my children growing up being sexually interfered with. Is that too bad? But it's too late. I already introduced my child to, the local LGBTQ youth group. And next thing you know, she's being exposed to BDSM information, and she's writing porn with like 13-year-old girls. And then they wonder why I have problems with this. Her peer group is incredibly toxic. These people are self-harming. They're on medication on top of medication. They compare medications and their symptoms and their injuries like they're collector's cards. That's what they want to do. They want to compare their damage and compare how oppressed they are. That's their identity. And my daughter shows up. She's like, you've got anger management problems, Dad. You don't respect people's pronouns, Dad. Well, man, this kid whose pronouns I'm not respecting has changed their name 4 times in a year. What I got to go with? And I've known this kid since they were 8 years old. What's with them? They were harming. They were in counseling before they ever discovered the gender stuff. And guess what? They're still harming and they're still in counseling, even though they've transitioned. It didn't solve anything. It didn't solve anything. But if you say that, oh my God, literally in this situation, this person's parents tried to dox me personally. They put my real legal name on where I worked on a public forum when none of this stuff was attached to my legal name, but they still decided to, put it out there. Oh, here we go. This is another one I found out. Where was it? Loudoun? I'm not sure where Loudoun County School Board. A child in an LGBTQ affirming environment sexually assaulted a young woman in a bathroom, in the ladies' washroom. A 15-year-old girl was sexually assaulted. And the mother, who's an ally, another one of these virtue signaling, my child can do no wrong and you have no right to criticize my child mothers, goes and says he depicted the rape as an accident. He told me that he didn't mean to insert himself in her anus and was surprised when it caused her pain. He was intending for vaginal and it ended up 10 seconds as anal, the mom recalls. And she tells the girl, you're 15, you can reasonably defend yourself. You're not just going to sit there and take it. And because there was no presence of a fight, he felt it was okay to continue the rape. This is a boy in a skirt that insists on admission into the girl's washroom. And this goes on. And then the ally mother tries to blame the victim of rape. Why didn't you stop it? It was only a little bit in the ass. Okay, but what happened to believe the victim? Victim heroism only works as long as we're all in the same boat, right? As soon as you start oppressing other people, then your victimhood is bigger than their oppression. Case in point, Israel. Okay. So these young communists, they love this stuff, they love it. They're totally in on it. But at the same time, here's a picture on my page of John and Yoko Ono waiting for the maid to make the bed so they can protest against the system again. Literally. The highest level of privilege in capitalism with all of their virtue signaling still allowing, the lower classes to maintain them. And, we've got this guy, editor of The Lancet, Richard Horton, that says straight up, much of the scientific literature, perhaps half, may simply be untrue. Afflicted by studies with small sample sizes, tiny effects, invalid exploratory analysis, and flagrant conflicts of interests, together with an obsession for pursuing fashionable trends of dubious importance, science has taken a turn towards darkness. So when these people with this narrative of boys can go in the girls' washroom, or, men can have babies, or men can be allowed into women's prison if they identify as women, they go back on science. They go back on science regularly to justify what they're saying is legitimate. But the science has been compromised. The science has been compromised. And if it hasn't been compromised, then why are we believing the most ridiculous shit in the world? Men cannot have babies. Here, I've got a scenario for you. If these people keep insisting that a man, a perfectly functional man with intact genitals that identifies as a woman should be allowed in a women's prison, right? Because that's his gender identity, and gender identity is paramount to biological reality, right? So if you've been identifying as a woman, even though you have functional testicles, you're creating sperm, and when men get allowed in women's prison, they end up with women getting pregnant from this woman. Why are male identifying inmates that have vaginas not being put in men's prisons? Like, really, really, if your identity is paramount, or if your identity trumps reality, and like, if I identify as a woman, I should be put in a women's prison regardless of my biology. Why aren't they putting the women that identify as men into the men's prisons? Because they'll get raped? Maybe, but the men are doing it to the women when they get in the women's prison, and they haven't given a shit about men getting raped by men for the last, I don't know, several hundred years. Why suddenly care about it? Because we've got the most conflicted value system. Right and wrong are inverted. Right and wrong are inverted. And popular media is portraying the people running away from a degenerate system as being the villains. Really? You know, we're trying to protect the innocent people here. Quit putting dangerous people in with vulnerable people. And then they'll say they're not dangerous. They're not dangerous until they're proven to be dangerous. And they say, well, those ones are examples. Those are rare exceptions, and they aren't the norm. Well, kind of like the rare exception of abusive priests in residential schools as opposed to the norm. Well, that's different. We don't talk about that. The same way with the people talking about bodily autonomy. Bodily autonomy. I've got a right to control my own bodily autonomy when it comes to my uterus. But it doesn't count when I don't want to get a vaccine. That bodily autonomy doesn't count. Weird. My body, my choice. So we're living in a strange new world. It's funny, brave new world. And like, we have a mixture of like these different dystopian novels happening in real time, while increasingly they're telling you that these dystopian novels are disinformation and they're propaganda for extremism. Like literally, when 1984, for example, which was a classic warning against totalitarian states, is now being rebranded as extremist literature by a state that is becoming increasingly totalitarian. Like this, you can't even make it up. We're not talking about the Turner Diaries here, people. This is George Orwell's 1984. And you're saying it's extremist literature and you're removing it from online libraries. What the fuck? What the fuck? Because it's pointing out exactly what you're doing. Newspeak, where you're revamping language for the party line. You know, the word gender has replaced identity. The word hate has replaced disagreeance. The word violence has replaced, criticism. So you're rebranding it. Winston Smith in 1984 worked for the Ministry of Information. The whole job of his job was censoring things that went against the party line, erasing people from history. People were completely, it's like Stalin on steroids. But by reading about this in 1984, you're now an extremist because you're going to recognize the steps that the current systems are doing to censor us and to control us and to corral us into small little pens to be more functional livestock. And if you say this out loud, I'm not telling you to go, pick up a rifle. I'm not telling you to go be a fucking radical. I'm telling you to open your fucking eyes to the hypocrisy that's going on, to the indoctrination, to the toxicity that's being considered normal. When Christianity is considered evil, what's good? When moral systems of philosophy are considered evil, what becomes good? Degenerate hedonism. Degenerate hedonism is what we're replacing it with. And I'm not going to pretend that like European people haven't done atrocious things. King Leopold, Winston Churchill, all of these people, they've done horrible things. But then so has, I guess, the Ottoman Empire, the Barbary slave trade. You can't pretend that there was this noble time before colonialism when human sacrifice wasn't being committed and cannibalism and kidnapping and rape of women. All of these indigenous people did it. There was wars for territories. There was massacres, villages smashed up, totally burned, scalps taken, skulls crushed in. Like, this stuff happened, man. And in some places, the Catholic Church showed up and they said, we don't do that anymore. The British Empire showed up and they said, we don't stone women anymore. We don't allow rape. This is what we do. And I remember this one story. I forget where I read it. A British soldier shows up and there's this woman about to be stoned by her family for an honor killing. And the British soldier's like, what are you doing? And he's like, well, this is our culture. You have no right to intrude on my culture. We kill women that disrespect the family by, making out with another guy or whatever the case may be. This is our culture. Well, the British soldier said, well, it's our culture to kill men that do that to women. So the choice is yours. You can do this because it's your culture, but like we're colonizing you. and we will kill you if you kill this woman over an honor killing. So the woman didn't get killed. So which is worse? Which is the worst evil? You know, the narrative that you've been oppressed by the system that allows you a cell phone to post about it, that allows you hot running water, that has electricity, you have a car, you have a phone, you have safety, general safety, as long as we can maintain it, You know, the system, the functional system that we have is predicated on the colonization that these people claim to hate. And they call it white supremacy, Well, you know, maybe they instilled a value system that is dominant, but anybody can adhere to the laws and the morality and what's healthy and what's going to create a functional infrastructure. That's not based on ethnicity. Sorry, it doesn't work for you, but really, next time I hear somebody who's really all about how oppressed they are by modern society, short of like, you know, incongruent value systems being imported into our borders.
Yeah, I rape him. What was going on in your mind at the time when you were doing this?
You give me the sex, then I will be satisfied. If you don't, I will make a plan to kill you.
You get to realize that that woman, she's now HIV positive.
Yes.
How do you feel that you gave her HIV?
I'm powerful.
You are powerful?
Yeah, I'm powerful. Powerful guy. HIV, so I want to spread that HIV. When I feel you have calves, you nice, like the way I want, I will make a plan to get you.
You know, my daughter being afraid to walk down to 7-Eleven is actually a pretty significant oppression, but we're not going to mention that level of oppression, that intersecting level of oppression, because we're, you know, importing a incompatible value system, right? So when these people talk about that, how oppressed have you been? You know, I couldn't afford to go to college. I read a lot, you know, but I couldn't afford to go to college because my family was poor. And I was, you know, a street kid since I was 13 and interfered with sexually by random people before that time. Tell me about my privilege some more. How I got a minimum wage job, and from that I was able to rent a little tiny space doing the trade I know how to do, and then slowly build up a business from a minimum wage job when I was never given anything and, you know, turned away from welfare, right? All my privilege. The only privilege I has is that maybe I can speak well and I'm intelligent and I could talk to a landlord and convince them that we weren't a bunch of scumbags. Yeah, I don't know, man. I think that there's some real failed narratives going on. And at the same time, we keep hearing from these people that the secular left, I call them the secular left, and they say, you know, we don't depend on ancient religions and arbitrary authorities for our moral compass. People can act morally without these antiquated systems. And I'm like, okay, you know, I get it, because I said that once until I did a lot of work. And now we can look at the society that's being built by the secular left liberal morality. And you have people walking around naked and they're obese and they're exposing themselves to children and calling it a human right. You know, men sticking tampons up their ass and pretending they're women. Literally. You know, you have women screaming in the streets about how oppressed they are while they drove their Prius there and they're posting about it on their $1,000 cell phones. You got people in government, you know, with wigs and mustaches. They're having sex in Congress. People being led around on leashes, all out, done up in leather with butt plugs up their ass. That's a tail. Oh, I'm glad that your morality worked out good, where children are pretending to rape each other and thinking that sex work is a good thing. You know, violence in our streets, homelessness. There's literally, if your morality is so great, where's the social safety net for these people? Why are they shooting drugs on the street? I can walk down the street and see somebody with a needle in their arm or a meth pipe in their lips. Where's your morality when it comes to that? You just give them free needles and free pipes, and that's the situation. I don't know, man. We're living in some really interesting and spiraling times. You know, wealth without work, pleasure without conscience, knowledge without character, commerce without morality, science without humanity, worship without sacrifice, politics without principle. These are the 7 social sins, right? Mahatma Gandhi put this out. He was the first to write this. And, actually, technically, I believe Frederick Lewis Donaldson first wrote them and Mahatma Gandhi published them in his newspaper. But that's just it. We've got wealth without work, pleasure without conscience, knowledge without character, commerce without morality, science without humanity, worship without sacrifice, and politics without principle. This is what I see coming from the new progressive narrative, the rebirth of the Frankfurt School, the rebirth of neo-Marxism. You know, they believe that their entire world was given to them by this system and that everybody has equal rights to the same system. And they depend on the system and they defend the system. And they're going to continue to defend the system and narrative. They're going to modify it to fit their special interest needs for as long as they can. And my girlfriend sometimes gets on my case. She's like, why do you get so wrapped up in this? Why are you doing this? Is it just a hobby? Because it seems to keep you stressed all the time. And Edmund Burke said, all that is necessary for evil to conquer in this world is for good men to do nothing. Apathy is a greater sin than accomplice almost, right? So I see something going on. I see the trajectory it's on. I see the hypocrisy in it. And somebody has to speak up. Some child needs to stand up and yell, the emperor wears no clothes. But we don't want to be that person because we're afraid of the bad word. You don't want to be called phobic. You don't want to be called a bigot. You don't want to be tarred and brushed and lose your income and lose your safety. And these people would see you starved and on the street and being victims of crime if they could, if you question it. They would have you dragged in front of the crowd like Mao's Red Guards, the university students being indoctrinated into communism during the Great Revolution, the People's Revolution of China. And they would see you beaten and like degraded like a landlord or a business owner. And they would have you wearing signs around your neck that you were a transgression. You were a transgression. You were against the means of the people. They would have you publicly shamed if they could. And they consider themselves the moral ones, the empathetic ones, because they're championing the cause of the underdog. When realistically, in 2024, the underdog is the moral family person who's just trying to keep a moral family and not watch it get flushed down the spiral, the toilet of addiction, of sense pleasure, of junk food, obesity, sexual degeneration. That is the real counterculture. All right, I kind of went off a little longer than normal. I don't know. I just wish all of you to do the work. You hear it from the left all the time. Do the work. But the work is trying to be better than you were yesterday. Trying to be better tomorrow than you were today. That's all I got to say. And that should be equally applied to everybody all around the world. Physically, emotionally, psychologically, spiritually. All right, take it easy. I'll try and get these out a little more regularly now that I have the equipment set up in my shitty omnidirectional mic with an antique computer in my basement. This is just me recording this with my literature around me. Okay, peace, love, and granola, people. Catch me on the rebound. I'm out.
Don't talk, don't say anything. Let me look at you. Yeah, I knew I was right. I knew it. You're alive. I was tough on both of you. And I did things that made you hate me sometime. But you understand now, don't you?
What happened, Dad? Why are you here? What'd they do?
Doesn't matter. One way or another, for one reason or another, we're all gone. It's all gone. Well, I ain't gonna be around to pick you up when you fall now. Both of you gotta take care of each other now. Can't afford to be crying anymore now. I don't want either one of you to ever cry for me again. Don't ever do it. Not as long as you live. You all get going now. Get out before they find you.
Shot down, Boys! Avenge me! Avenge me!